So I've been thinking about disillusionment in politics in this year of global electoral activity, with the sense that people feel apathetic, disillusioned, disappointed, disgruntled about politics, particularly in the Western world, and wondering what that might be saying, and the need to ask pre-political questions: what politics is for, what kind of good life do we pursue, what does it ask of citizens as much as of leaders. I was reading today about sophistication bias, the notion that those who are most involved in something, most sophisticated about it, often miss the basic truths or get fooled as to what is going right and wrong. And it feels that those who are immersed in politics have lost the ability to see the wood for the trees, and so need some sort of fresh perspective. Seeking that, in previous posts I've turned to Plato on beauty, Aristotle on ethics, last time Jesus and how to be in the world but not of the world, and now I want to turn to Dante, the fourth of my guides, and ask about civilisational degeneracy. Now, Dante is well known for the Divine Comedy, his personal journey through hell, purgatory, and into paradise. But he also very clearly, many times, says this is not just a personal journey, it's not just one that he invites you and I on as well, but it's also a reflection on his times. It's an account of how the individual and society together can fall into hellish states, or be renewed through purgatorial moments, and even be able to keep an eye on the paradisal. The comedy is also sometimes called a political work in the sense that Dante references political opponents and indeed seems to take revenge on them by casting them into the darkest reaches of hell, onto the circles that have particularly gruesome forms of torture. And no doubt Dante was deeply disillusioned and injured by the trials of his time. But it's much more than just a narrowly political work in that sense. It's a deep reflection on the nature of what it is to live, to be human, to live in communities and societies, prompted by the complete collapse of the world that Dante himself knew. He lived in a time of civil war on the Italian peninsula, perhaps the worst kind of calamity that can afflict a society, and certainly felt practically that good monarchs were preferable to republics. He felt republics were too subject to mob rule, to takeover by powerful figures, and that a good monarch who had an eye on their calling, not just on the exercise of their role, was preferable. Now that's a practical solution to his times, but he also thought about the nature of civilization itself and the values that need to prevent a civilization from falling into degeneracy. And a key image that he uses to think about this is known as the Old Man of Crete. This is a mythological statue that stands under Mount Ida on the island of Crete. And Crete's significant because it's halfway between the Italian peninsula and Egypt. And Egypt is well known now and then for being the home of a civilization that was deeply impressive at its peak, but has clearly fallen away, namely ancient Egyptian civilization. And the Old Man of Crete stands beneath Mount Ida with his back to Egypt, as it were, aware of what can happen, and looking towards the Italian peninsula, reflecting on whether the same kind of rise and fall, collapse, is happening there. The implication, Dante says, is that it indeed is. But there's more to the Old Man of Crete than just where he stands. What he's made of counts as well. He has a head of gold, he has arms of silver, he has a torso of bronze, he has legs of iron and feet of clay. And from out of his feet flows a red, polluted river. Now, the gold is the most valuable part, that which can see, perceive, reach to the heights as well as be connected to the earth. Silver, slightly less valuable. That's a more practical part of the body, the arms, the hands that can do things. The torso, which is made of bronze, a kind of core strength, and then the iron legs upon which weight and load can be borne. But then in a degenerate culture, the feet have become clay. And as Dante contemplates the Old Man of Crete, he describes the feet of clay crumbling and deteriorating and seeping this red, polluted river. Feet of clay is not meant so much in terms of character flaw, but relying on the wrong kind of power. The power that destroys even as it is used, the power that a society feels it can control best, i.e. technology. And that's not completely misguided, because a civilization after it has risen and grown will tend to have very good technology, tend to have relied upon the use of that kind of power for its spread and for its growth. But what Dante is saying is that when that technology becomes too relied on, it crumbles underneath the weight of what it is being asked to bear, because these more valuable parts of the body politic, that represented by the bronze, the silver and the gold in particular, have been forgotten. They're overlooked, and so the technology is stretched to breaking point, to exhaustion, to the point where it pollutes everything it touches, like the Red River. And it also, this kind of power leads to a preoccupation with the future and a fear of the past. That's important in the Divine Comedy, because when there's no present moments, there's no real opportunity for change. Things increasingly get driven by fear. The future is deemed to hold all that could be good, could be better, and is not yet materialized in the present. And the past is deemed to hold all that was bad and needs to be escaped. And so life comes to be seen apocalyptically, as if we rest, we will fall, as if unless we find ways of critiquing the now and fleeing from present ills, we will fall indeed. It's kind of like a nightmare that haunts the present moment. And so Dante is describing a civilization that's become degenerate. The overexertion of the power it feels control has actually turned to consume that society. And so wars, political collapse, loss of these higher values, the spiritual, are features of this kind of society. What's got lost is not just the gold and silver, we'll come to that, but is also this intermediate zone, the zone of the body, made particularly of bronze. And the point about bronze is it's a material that human beings collaborate with in order to make, to manufacture. So too, there's a way in which we can be in the world that's working with the world to make things of value. And this is about not so much controlling all that is around us, the environment, the elements, but understanding them, relating to them, drawing out qualities from within them in a way that changes us as much as we change them. And this is the purgatorial way of being in the world. It looks out, it understands its own limitations and tries to collaborate in order to make things better. It recognizes faults, it tries to hear the wider energies in which our life is immersed. And Dante's own time of exile was a purgatorial state, I think. He fell foul of the wrong side of the civil war of his time, was exiled on pain of death, lost everything, and spent the last 20 years of his life wandering from state to state, trying to find sanctuary. And although this was a terrible time for him, it was also the time in which he wrote the Divine Comedy, and so became the seabed of new growth for him and a complete transformation of his understanding. So civilizations can have these purgatorial periods, he's saying as well, and they're ones in which they know to reach out, they know they're at fault, they know that they have limitations, but that by collaborating with a wider spirit, a new way forward can be found. Then, of course, there are the most valuable parts of the Old Man of Crete, the silver of his arms and the gold of his head. And this represents the eternal perspective. It's knowing most completely what politics is for. It's for making an earthly city that prepares us for eternity, the eternal city. Now that's partly experienced in the here and now too, the qualities of life which speak of more than our immediate concerns, that connect us with a wellspring, with a source, that's about relating not just to the immediate world around us, but to those transcendent dynamics. It's a time when what's good, what's beautiful, what's true is most supremely valued. And politics have an eye on eternity in very practical ways as well. For example, societies in the past where the yearly calendar is replete with festivals, I think is a sign of this golden age. And that means that life is not just being lived according to the chronological calendar clock, as if every moment is to be squeezed for its productivity, but also by the chirological experience of time, which are those moments through things like festivals when the eternal is drawn down into the present, when things are celebrated, when time out is taken in order for renewal. Festivals are an important part of a civilization that is growing well. Pilgrimages, I think, are another part of this kind of social organisation. And the point about pilgrimages is that they're time out from work in order that individuals might be renewed by walking to holy places, by spending time in contemplation, by venerating the great heroes of the society in the past, the saints and so on. Another way in which, very practically, a policy may bring down the eternal into the present. A third one would be a kind of welfare system that's not just about keeping people physically well and healthy, valuable though that is, but has the extra element that it also fosters good ways of dying. Dying is seen as a transitional state in these kind of societies, one that's as important to life as physical health and well-being. This life is always a preparation for more than this life. Not just in the sense of what happens in the afterlife, but bringing down that expansive, widening perception of what human life can be about with reference to that which is eternal. So Dante saw his civilizational moment as one of degeneracy. The clay feet were crumbling, society was collapsing, the environment itself was becoming polluted. And he feared that it wouldn't be able to find its way back to a purgatorial state of renewal, let alone one that honoured the eternal in its festivals, in its pilgrimages, and so on. Now, I think that the church had become warmongering, society had broken down into this terrible civil war, power was about coercion and fear rather than beauty and allure. And personally, I don't think our society is in this infernal state, but nonetheless, I think that culturally we have lost sight of the eternal and can feel the existential crisis coming upon us, but still have the option to be in a period of exile, a period of not knowing, re-engaging with wider energies. In other words, this purgatorial frame of mind. There's still the capacity to remake ourselves in relation to the wider world and to rediscover the transcendent, to use these guides such as truth, beauty and goodness once again. That is something that won't be said by any politician during an election campaign, I don't suppose, although perhaps when a political party suffers a landslide defeat, it will indeed be put into a purgatorial moment to be asked again what it really stands for. But for those of us who seek to address the disillusionment with spiritual reflection as part of this pre-political reframing of what politics is for and what a good life is about, Dante, of course, himself is no bad place to turn. He went through these things, he considered these things, he wrote poetically in order to bring about a transformation of these things. And he writes for now, in fact. He's not just a medieval poet, he deliberately wrote for the future because what was unfolding in his times, he feared, might repeat themselves in ours.